Welcome back to the Sanjay Says podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the ecstasy and agony of getting smart about drug use. Because ecstasy is a drug. That's why I chose that title. I hope you think it's funny.
Read my red, turn the page. Sanjay's words, they pave the way.
Dumb people and crisis-obsessed media give drugs a bad reputation. The real story is actually more positive. The first time I did a drug recreationally was 11 years ago on a crowded dance floor in Las Vegas. The next morning, I woke up with no memory of anything that had happened after I took the pill. I was also sick and literally had to crawl from my hotel room to the conference room where my company was having its annual strategy meeting. Not a good introduction to recreational drugs. Fortunately, I was able to get quickly hooked up to an IV from Hangover Heaven for an advertised 45-minute recovery period. My assistant, Emily, walked into the conference room as I was telling the story to my executive team of how an attractive stranger had suggested that I try a pill. Emily listened for a bit, and when it became obvious there was going to be no redeeming elements to the story, she asked me, "What the hell were you thinking?" "It was on my bucket list to try ecstasy," I cried in my defense, showing her a list on my iPhone. Like literally, it was actually on my... Anyway, she grabbed my phone and scrolled down to where I had clearly written, "Try ecstasy in a controlled environment." Emily looked up, hit my arm, and scolded, "How is the dance floor of a nightclub with a bunch of strangers a controlled environment? We all thought you'd gone to bed when we couldn't find you." I will point out other things on my bucket list where I've seen the Disney World fireworks. I have been on a private jet. I wrote a book, Zero to Tesla. You should buy it. I opened a bar. I have not seen the Super Bowl live, gone to Tomorrowland's EDM festival. I would like to go to space someday, ride in a Zeppelin. I don't even know if they still have Zeppelins. But anyway, I have a real bucket list. You should have a bucket list. So this was my first exposure to the truth. Drugs are for smart people. When I say, and I wasn't smart. That's my whole point. I did not do it in a controlled environment. I didn't know the person who gave it to me. I was an idiot. Drugs are for smart people. And when I say drugs, I mean all of them. Caffeine, alcohol, Ozempic, Vyvanse, shrooms, DMT, MDMA, cannabis, cigarettes, protein supplements, steroids, and sugar in all its terror-inducing forms. You don't think that this protein water has drugs in it? It's got drugs in it. At their core, drugs for recreation and drugs for self-improvement all have effects on your mood, your energy, your focus, your memory, your sleep cycle, and your overall enjoyment and experience of life. Regular workouts increase dopamine. So does doom scrolling Instagram. So does cocaine. Which is best and which is worst? Which one is destroying our social fabric? The answer isn't that simple, and it's not the same for everyone. Just remember this. Drugs are for smart people. I accepted a drug from a stranger in an uncontrolled environment. That was dumb. It also wasn't ecstasy. It was GHB. I had been roofied. Drugs are for smart people. I read this phrase for the first time on the front page of a dark website devoted to selling all kinds of things that Nancy Reagan told me would fry my brain. I've tried a lot of drugs since then, and my brain is still intact, so I know that she lied. Because if what you believe doesn't have predictive value, then you should stop believing it. Beliefs are to be tested against reality and adjusted as required, not clung to blindly. The key to the effective use of any drug is knowledge. Smart people know the risks and benefits of each drug. Smart people know the appropriate dosage. When someone suggests doing mushrooms, smart people don't take a handful. Smart people don't take drugs alone unless they have plenty of experience. Medical professionals and Google searches are great for information on commercial for-profit drugs. For anything less commercial, from supplements to herbal remedies to scheduled recreational drugs, you'll get better information by searching Reddit or from a knowledgeable friend who has experience. Addiction is caused by trauma, not drugs. It's the opposite of what people think. People don't take drugs and then become addicted. They have trauma that causes them to do things that create an addictive personality, including taking drugs. People who are addicted to drugs are likely to be addicted to all sorts of things because they're trying to numb some pain inside themselves, and drugs are great at numbing pain. The solution isn't in taking away the drugs. It's in effective therapy like CBT, compassionate inquiry, or internal family systems, often in combination with some form of accelerant like psychedelics and with a knowledgeable guide or therapist. See the link in the show notes for an article I wrote on internal family systems therapy. No drug or therapeutic technique will work for everybody. Experiment safely. There is no drug that will make you an addict on a single hit. There is no robust evidence of a chemical or genetic basis for addiction. There's no such thing as an addictive personality. There's only a person in pain. It's not that drugs don't work and that's why you have addicts. It's that they work all too well, but they're only covering up the real problem. If you know someone who suffers from addiction, the best thing you can do is talk to them, get them into therapy, change their life situation. They'll stop taking the drugs on their own. People say, yes, but what about heroin? Heroin is different. No, it's not. See the link in the show notes. But what happened when thousands of heroin addicts came home from the Vietnam War? I'll give you a short preview. 30% of Americans stationed in Vietnam were on heroin, were addicted to heroin. And 3 months after coming back stateside, only 3% were addicted to heroin. That's a 90% drop of all these people who were addicted. All it took was changing their situation. Turns out that being in the jungle and being shot at makes you want to forget about your life, and heroin's a great way to do that. Don't be a drug elitist. Cannabis makes me ill. It doesn't mean I should go around telling people cannabis is terrible. Every drug affects everyone differently. Just because you like cannabis doesn't mean everyone will benefit from cannabis. And just because you hate cigarettes doesn't mean everyone who smokes cigarettes is a fool. If a drug has benefit for some people and they use it responsibly, then why prohibit it? Dr. Carl Hart does a great job of describing the phenomena of drug elitism in his book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, which I highly recommend if you have an open mind and want to learn how you've been lied to in the war on drugs. Here's the short version. Recreational drugs are illegal because they're an excuse to put people in jail, specifically people who can't afford a good lawyer, poor people, Black people. A friend of mine was found with cocaine in a Las Vegas nightclub. Does he now have a felony record? Is he banned from crossing the border? Hell no, he's rich. He hired a good lawyer. Pity a poor Black 19-year-old in the same situation. He'd still be in jail 11 years later. See a link in the show notes for an admission from a Nixon staffer that the purpose of the war on drugs was to put Black people and Vietnam War protesters in jail. The problem isn't the drugs. Every tale of a disastrous drug experience begins with the question, how much did you take? And the answer, I don't know. Bad drug trips come from a lack of knowledge and are completely preventable. The problem is that the media only reports when a drug user shows up in the emergency room or takes a whole bunch of drugs and tries to fly a plane, not the millions of people who use both legal and illegal drugs every day to positive effect without ruining their own or anybody else's life. I had a friend once who was terrified of using an ATM because she worked in a bank and saw daily dozens of cards that had been eaten by ATMs. I get it. If all you see is the downside, you'll ignore the millions of daily successful transactions. During COVID, there was an irrational response from many people of trying to avoid any and all risk. If only each article about the terrors of COVID was accompanied by a link to a basic course on probability and statistics. But no, that would have calmed people down instead of working them up. Exactly the opposite of what for-profit media platforms do all day, every day. Just working people up, doing whatever they can do to get news in front of you that's going to make you upset and click and read more. Base your opinions and behavior on complete knowledge. Do research. Do not trust any single source, not even me. Drugs are getting a better reputation. Fortunately, we're entering a fantastic era of being able to treat the trauma in people's lives that lead to problems like drug addiction. The number one target of psychedelic-assisted therapy is PTSD, often in combat veterans, but even more often resulting from childhood adverse events. After successful trials, the FDA is due to approve the medical use of MDMA, also known as Ecstasy or Molly, for the treatment of PTSD, as early as the end of this year. The treatment works in part by allowing people to revisit their original trauma with a therapist while buoyed and supported by the positive emotions created by MDMA. And they are really positive if you've never tried it. Treating trauma will treat all sorts of behavioral issues. It won't be simple, it won't be easy, but it's a start. And it's better than over-medicating a planet with opiates, Adderall, and Ozempic, all of which are legal medicines with as much or more harm potential than psychedelics, but with powerful corporate lobbies to keep them legal. All drugs have beneficial uses for some segment of the population. All drugs are harmful if used without adequate knowledge and care. Don't be a drug elitist, saying that your favorite drug is the only one that should be legal. The future of drugs in our society will, I hope, be with complete safety and foreknowledge. Want increased focus for an exam? Want to lose weight? Want to get over your fear of flying? There's a drug combination for that. No stigma, no overdoses. When I tried recreational drugs, I didn't do my research first. I wasn't smart. Want to do some research? Anything you're interested in, type into a search bar with the word Reddit at the end. You'll find a wide variety of discourse on any subject associated with drugs, not just rabid enthusiasm or blind censoring. Curious about a drug combination? See the link in the show notes for a website that tells you the results of combining drugs. Got some street drugs and afraid it might be laced with fentanyl? Test it, or take it to a lab to get tested if your city has such a service. Drugs aren't bad. Dying from a drug overdose is bad. Drugs for therapy. In stark contrast to the Las Vegas dance floor, the first therapeutic drug experience I had was 6 years ago with a retired therapist who had discovered the power of psychedelics to accelerate healing. I had a 6-hour psilocybin mushroom journey that opened up a world of self-exploration and healing and flourishing for me and subsequently for hundreds of others that I've referred to psychedelic healers. In one session, I resolved emotional trauma from my childhood that 20 years of conventional therapy hadn't touched. Psychedelics don't work for everyone, but used properly, they're completely safe and worth trying. My daughter has had some success using ketamine to treat an eating disorder. Nicaean Foundation, which I founded in 2019, has collected many more stories of success in using unconventional drug therapies to treat personal trauma. The number one reaction I've heard from many people over the years trying a recreational or therapeutic drug for the first time is, "That was amazing. Why is this illegal?" Answering that question will take you down a rabbit hole that will sadden and infuriate you if you have a genuine concern for humanity. Start with Dr. Hart's book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups. The solution to the damage done by the war on drugs is education and conversation. If you use drugs therapeutically or recreationally and have benefited, talk about it. We need more information and dialogue, not lies and fear-mongering. The solution is get smarter about drug use. If you use drugs and you're in a dark place, talk to someone, get some help. If you're thinking about using drugs, make sure it's in a safe and controlled environment with people you trust and who know what they're doing. Talk about your own drug use openly and talk about how to use drugs safely and effectively. The path to better mental health outcomes requires more education and more conversation. It requires more smart people. Drugs are for smart people. Be smart, people. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sanjay Says. Tune in next week for more stories about how I've messed up my life that'll help you mess up yours a little bit less. Remember, do as I say, not as I do.
He's been there.